Welcome everybody. Hopefully you're all comfortably seated there, either at home or at work. I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Kris Brown. I'm the VP of Product here at RecordPoint, and looking forward to sharing some insights with you today on the presentation around unlocking return on investment, or ROI, with the RecordPoint Data Trust platform. I'm just going to give everybody just a couple of moments to get settled. There's still a few people joining from what I can see on the platform, so we'll give them just a few seconds and then we'll absolutely get started. A bit of administrivia for you. So you should see a questions tab there. So if you do have any things that you'd like to share with us, you can feel free to drop that in there. You'll be the only one who can see your questions. Myself and my team who are online, they'll be in there as well. And then as we get to the end, I'll either answer them live here if we've got a bit of time left over, but we will make sure for those who have registered an appropriate email address, etc., that we do answer those questions for you as well. So I will make sure that we're sharing those as we're going along. A couple of people have already noted that you might remember me from such product companies as Tower Software, and yes, absolutely, the same guy. So I think I might have carried the handle of that trim guy back in the day. So all of that's all my fault. I apologise for that. Look, again, what we'll do is we'll get started. So again, welcome to those who have jumped on and joining us today. From an agenda perspective, I've sort of got 5 key points that I want to get through today. And then I'm using it more of as sort of scenarios around things that I would hope that this audience is sort of either have seen in their organisations, and ways in which you can use the RecordPoint Data Trust platform to solve those problems. The features that we've got available, the way in which it works is ever so slightly different, probably to a traditional information management platform. And then, of course, talking then about that ROI. How can we actually articulate a business case or articulate value for doing that work? Not only in terms of, oh, well, you get better compliance and those sorts of things. That would probably be very obvious. But going the other way and actually starting to put some real dollar figures around things that you will be avoiding, or effort that you will be removing, or even risks that you're removing from your organization, and assigning savings or avoided fines or avoided costs as we make our way through. So again, feel free to chuck in questions. I said, hopefully you're all very comfortable and ready to go. The RecordPoint Data Trust platform, so let me do the advertising bit. The RecordPoint Data Trust platform is actually all about helping organizations like yourselves, highly regulated organizations, make sure that their data is right where it should be, ensuring that it's safeguarded for privacy, security, and governance. The goal of our platform is to still help you do all of the things that you need to do as it wraps around your information management components, your security components, and obviously the newly introduced privacy areas that you might be dealing with, but making sure you're able to do that seamlessly across the entirety of our organization. Now, the way in which we like to do that is by actually providing vital intelligence all the way through every process in your business, and make sure that those processes themselves are defensible across the entirety of that piece of data's life cycle. And you'll note that I use data a lot here as opposed to document, because this actually works for both structured and unstructured data. So systems like SharePoint, we've got Word docs, Excel docs, traditional file shares, but Teams, SAP, Workday, Google, Box, Dropbox, homegrown systems. So regardless of system, providing all of this additional intelligence to help both the information manager, the privacy, the cybersecurity, and other elements of your organization to be able to get great value from the information that you have, while also helping you to meet your compliance and other elements. So I want to talk about one of the key features as it relates to structured and unstructured information to begin with, and that's in-place management. So for those who haven't heard that term before, the key with in-place management is that your end user no longer has to move the data from one system to another. So the traditional, again, for those who recognize me as the trim guy, the traditional method of I must check in the document, I capture that object and completely pull it away from either a desktop or some other system, rip it out of SharePoint and move it to this other system, and then fill in metadata and other things, is very, very different to an in-place management. For a user, I work in the environment that I wish to work in. I leave that data where it is. I know where it is. I know how to return to it. I know how to get to it. I know how to share it with my collaborators. And yet RecordPoint's Data Trust platform will ensure that that object is under management and you get all the values of that Record Data Trust platform. So the biggest pieces here, or if we start to think about that problem, and I've described a little bit of it to begin with, but the biggest thing about relying on the end user to capture all of the information is that they don't. In my time across many different products, I've not met an organization that has had the capability to put their hand on their heart and say, every user in our organization captures every single piece of important information into our records platform. It's a goal. It's a very lofty goal, and certainly, the easier it gets and the simpler the interfaces get, it does make it certainly much more viable. But the biggest thing is that ultimately we're relying on the end user to do something to mark this information as a record, even in a platform like SharePoint, for example, that ability to say, this is a record, while a very simple process isn't always performed. The other thing is that it's not always just in one system. We've just had a pandemic. Everybody's moved home. We've started to have sort of remote working and all sorts of other changes to the way in which we operate. Organizations have changed to a number of different systems. They've moved much closer to being 100% on cloud, but there's still the lingering on-premise environments. There's still the lingering file shares, and things are getting shuffled around and migrated everywhere. And businesses are changing the way in which they want to interact. So even just having a single central system where all of this is integrated has become much more difficult and diverse than it used to be. And let's put our hands up and say it out loud. There is always going to be that end user apathy. If I'm the finance user and I'm busy doing finance things all day, the last thing I'm probably going to be thinking about is ensuring that I do the appropriate records categorization. The same is going to be true for the HR manager, the assets manager, the privacy manager, and these other information workers through my business. It doesn't mean that that's endemic. And in some organizations, the training and the outcomes are all there and people understand. But ultimately, we are still relying on a user to perform a task, which today we're actually able to do automatically. So let me talk about how that's true and possible. So in the RecordPoint Data Trust platform, we use what we call our Enterprise Connector framework to connect to your sources. It's able to connect to thousands of sources and then move that data into what we call our ingestion pipeline. It leaves the data in the original source. It only processes that data. And so the user who's working in finance, or the user who's working in HR, or the user who's working in a particular system like a Workday or Box, for example, that data is where they left it. It's where they want to work on it. It's where they want to collaborate on it. But with that connection through the Enterprise Connector framework, we're actually then able to use our intelligence pipeline to determine a number of things about those objects. Are they rot? Is there duplicates across the platform? Is there any sensitive data? We're able to do automatic classification of the object, apply its retention and classification details automatically, and collect all the metadata that's left behind in the source system, so that then at the records management and at the information management end, at the processing end, you now have the ability to do all of your data governance elements on scale. You're able to report across all of your sources and most importantly, all of your data, regardless of whether there was any apathy, and ensure that you have all of the information to know what you have, where you have it, what's in it, and what you should do with it next. And so the RecordPoint Data Trust platform gives you this flow of the end users over to the left here, able to look at the information the way they're used to looking at it, use the system that they are used to using, work in the way in which they normally would work. And yet the information manager at the other end is actually able to influence the categorization and the processes around that data through that intelligence pipeline in the middle. So let's talk about how that might unlock a little bit of an ROI from a traditional environment. Even really, really marginal improvements on what an employee is doing on a day-to-day can actually translate out to really significant savings. And I think in this instance, I've probably been really conservative. So if we use a standard sort of size organization for today's calculations of 1,000-person organization, and I would imagine that most of the people on this call are either probably ever so slightly above or ever so slightly below, but you can see how the math is done here and obviously apply it to yourselves. If on average everybody sort of works with a couple of documents a day, and let's say they only get 20 emails a day, if they were to be manually processing those and they could process them in under 5 seconds. Now, I know this year I spoke a little bit about this example in a session I did at AI in Rimper, and when I spoke to the room at the time, I said, how many people here could do catalog a document in under 5 seconds? And most people said they couldn't. It would be sort of either some 10 or maybe even 30 seconds for any random document. And that's the experts in the room being the records management group. So if I only use 5 seconds as the time it takes to check in and put in any additional cataloging of information, and then let's, for example, say across those 5 documents, it takes me a minute or so to go back and find from that system that I moved it to, be it a trim or some other system where you physically move the document away from where the user was working, so that 5 minutes for searching. If we calculate that out organizationally, that actually adds up to 118 hours of work time per day spent just checking in and searching for information. They already knew where it was because they were working on it in a particular place. That's up to 590 hours a week. And if we look at, say, a 49-week work year with a few weeks of holidays taken out, it's nearly 29,000 hours. With a very, very simple calculation against that wage, it's nearly $1 million of cost that can be eliminated through just a manage in place strategy by itself. Getting rid of the tasks of check-in, getting rid of the tasks of searching for information where you already knew where it was before, you could save nearly $1 million in this organization if these sorts of numbers matched yours. And to be honest, I think you could add a lot more seconds to that check-in and catalog time. Again, ensuring here that every single object is being captured. And I know a lot of us probably get a lot more than 20 emails a day too. So then let's talk about another problem or another scenario. So one of the key features that RecordPoint's Data Trust platform provides is it actually provides intelligence throughout that information lifecycle. And as you saw in the image before, where the sources are on the left, the users are working in that source natively. There's no change to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. The intelligent pipeline is connected through that enterprise connector framework to add all of that value. And so, again, if you think about things like data breaches and sort of cybersecurity tools that are connected and are set up to doing full perimeter protection, everybody's going to have those. And I'm not saying that this replaces those in absolutely no way. Am I saying that? But it absolutely can complement what's actually happening at the perimeter. For example, that ability to have all of your information inside the perimeter, have an understanding of what it is and what's in it, what type of privacy or other signals are in it, well before it ever reaches the perimeter or it becomes a part of a data breach. Understanding that, for example, in this file share, there's actually a whole bunch of credit card information that we weren't expecting, or even just dealing with the overall and overarching new privacy legislation that's coming up here in Australia, which actually, if we do the wrong thing and we become a part of a breach, potentially have severe financial penalties, obviously legal consequences, even if you just ignore the obviously harm to reputation. And so by having that platform in place that's capturing every single object across all of your sources and using the intelligence pipeline to be scanning for this information and providing that inventory for you, we're actually able to see this sort of information. So, for example, earlier this year, we ran a trial with 30 RecordPoint customers and turned this platform on for them. And so there's a little bit of a breakdown there of what we saw as just sort of some basic overarching insights. So, for example, of all of the records that we processed, and I think it was in excess of 200 million objects were taken through the process, 50% of them had some form of PII. Now, that might be as simple as a name or an email address, a phone number, those sorts of things. However, 10% of those records contained what we would consider critical PII, a passport number, a Medicare number, a driver's license. Those things are obviously much more critical in the event of a breach. And if you think about breaches in the past, like Medibank or the Optus scenario, having that data available out on the web and obviously away from the organization can cause severe grief for your consumers, your residents, your citizens, your constituents. If we looked at the storage of PII, it was like mostly in public sector. Again, fairly well expected here that public sector organisations are set up to deal with the constituent, and so are going to be collecting and working with information around that. And we also saw that, again, that around that 1,000 to 5,000 person organisation tended to have the most amounts of that PII data across all of those things. In our other RIMPA study this year, we also found that a lot of them have a lot of limited management resources in that same frame as well. So the risk element of those organisations absolutely goes up. And then really critically, credit card information. We saw that 1.7% of the documents that were processed from public sector organisations during the trial had a verified credit card number in them. That means that for every 100,000 files we processed, we found 1,700 credit card numbers in public sector organisations. Just think of that that headline. Insert your organisation here exposes 1,700 credit card numbers during data breach. Not having an understanding of that can help you. Is a bad thing. It's obviously, you're going to end up fined. You're probably going to end up a breach. I believe personally that it's more of a when than an if situation around that nowadays, especially given the disparate ways in organisations are working with data. But even with all of the best security in the world, things will still happen. And if 1%, roughly 1% of your data has credit card information in it, and you've got a lot of data, then it's a lot of credit card numbers, and ultimately that becomes a real problem. So using the intelligent signaling part of the RecordPoint Data Trust platform, while we're helping you to manage that information in place, we're also able to do that PII, PCI, ROT, and duplicate detection. Even just the simple side of determining that you do have credit card details in a particular area can help your security team to secure that better, or at least be more aware of the types of information flowing in and out of that environment. Obviously, that enrichment is constant. So anytime there's an edit or a change or a new version of the document, it passes again through that pipeline and it gets updated with new information. And of course, all of this platform allows you to actually report back on what's happening. You can see where that information is. And more importantly, you can start to make good actionable decisions, not only in your information governance room, but in your cybersecurity room, your privacy room, even with your legal and other areas of the business as well. So let's have a look at some numbers. If we have a look at unlocking the ROI, one of the biggest things here is going to be avoiding those breaches. Now, we could have done some ROIs here around duplication of information and others, and I'll actually talk a little bit about that in some of the other scenarios as we go down. But the average data breach cost is roughly $4.45 million, according to a study performed this year, and that's in USD. So these numbers here are in US dollars. So you could probably get close to doubling them to think about them in terms of the Australian dollar. So well over that $7-8 million range. The individual cost per record, so the cost per document is somewhere in the vicinity of $165 on average in 2023. Add PII to that document, so personally identifiable information, it goes up to 181, and employee PII. So a lot of the data breaches are a loss of your own personal employee information, and that ends up raising the cost to around about $181 per document involved in the breach. I'd hate to do the math to think about how much data was breached in terms of, say, the Optus and Medibank, and the costs that therefore effectively are incurred by virtue of that in terms of fines and others as we move forward. And the biggest thing here is obviously that ability to reduce those costs. Knowing that that information is there gives you the ability to act better. The act might be remove it. It's due for disposal. Let's get rid of it. If you think about, again, some of those other breaches that have happened as an Optus customer, I personally haven't been an Optus customer for 7 or 8 years. There probably wasn't a lot of reason for them to have that information about me anymore. So by just having good disposal actions, they could have possibly at least eliminated me from their affected customers. You then start to look at non-compliance. So if you get audited or if you get caught out at a part of a breach, you then obviously have your reportable elements of breaching. That then leads to obviously things like the Privacy Acts, GDPR, even the US CCPA coming into play. And fines there can be enormous. And if you've sort of started to read the drafts of the new Australian Privacy Act, they're sort of approaching this of the GDPR, which is, there's a maximum fine of sort of in and around 10 million euros, or it can be as high as 2% of your global revenue, which is a massive thing for obviously corporates and non-government entities. And of course, we have the opposite here in Australia, where you've got the Auditor General's office and the information, the Office of the Information Group, where they're actually able to, the Information Commission, where they're actually able to put sanctions and other things across organisations. If you're in a financial institution, APRA has a series of fines and others. So there's lots of regulation around making sure that you have a good handle on what your data is, where is it. CPS 234, for example, ensures for financial institutions that you can categorise all of your information, just so that you can know what it is and what you have and what you should be doing with it next. So let's talk a little bit about that categorization. So one of the cool features of the RecordPoint Data Trust platform is our auto classification engine, all built on top of an artificial intelligence engine. The really cool thing about AI, and again, if I go back to my RIMPA session, is it's here to help. It learns from our subject matter experts, and that's the information managers, the records managers, the people responsible for data governance. But you've got that standard struggle. The deluge of data, it's constantly increasing. There's no consistency across way either individuals or systems categorize and capture information. And I've already mentioned that end user apathy, if you will. One of the interesting things we also saw from the RIMPA study, the survey that we put out this year, was the maturity in AI has actually decreased. So in 2022, 29% of the respondents said that they had, a level of very immature as it related to AI. But moving forward, that moved up to 38%, with only 12% on the other end saying that they were somewhat mature, or very mature as it related to AI. And look, that's a challenge for RIMPA. That's a challenge for the records professional, is that we need to embrace these tools, because the volumes of data that we're expected to deal with, the volumes or the number of sources that we're expected to deal with are ever growing. And the change in work patterns, the way in which people are working with information, and of course that ever constant sort of march of the millennial and Gen Z and the digital natives that are coming through, that are just used to this electronic way of working from day one. And so we need to ensure that we can utilize all the tools at our disposal to ensure that we're going to get these great outcomes. And so introducing our classification intelligence engine, what it actually allows you to do is do this at scale. Again, I think in the RIMPA session, I mentioned that while we did some math a moment ago, of 1,000 people doing just a handful of documents, today adds up to 189 hours of work across the organization. Well, an intelligence engine like the RecordPoint Data Trust platform is able to process millions upon millions of documents in that same period. And importantly, it does that consistently, repeatably. It learns from the subject matter expert and the way in which you would categorize information. So you provide the training sets. The training sets are yours and yours alone. We don't share data across customers. Every single customer has their own data set that works against their information. And the models themselves are built using point and click by the information managers. So we've simplified this process of utilizing an AI engine to help to categorize millions of objects on any given day. And then the other side is that using our rules tree, you're actually able to then control where this information goes. So if you know information is coming from a particular source, you know that's mostly about finance, you can actually forward that to the AI engine with that information such that it knows to work inside a bound around sort of the finance area of your file plan, and therefore getting an even more accurate result. But critically, AI is able to answer these questions around what is a document much more consistently without apathy at scale and accurately than any given user in your organization, especially as we talk about doing it hundreds of thousands of times in any given day. So if we remove that need from your user and still want to gain the benefit, remembering that we're now actually able to capture everything in an organization using the Enterprise Connector framework, which connects to that intelligence pipeline. If you use simple math and say that it takes you 10 seconds to catalog an object and pick the right categorization, the likelihood of that being right is obviously, from an end user perspective, depends on your training and the apathy of the user. But 1 million objects is going to take 10 million seconds. So for every 1 million documents you have, you're going to be spending 1.4 employee years of time categorizing that information. So again, 1,000-person organization with that 100 emails and sort of 5 to 10 documents can add up to 38 million objects in a year, or in a year, 53 employee years of categorization. And if we use, say, low-level employees to do that, your ASO level 2 type employee, sort of that standard worker bee, you're looking at roughly $3 million in wages just to do that categorization work. And importantly, this is just included in the platform. It will do it for you. You can eliminate those costs in your business while including better accuracy, more consistency, and actively capturing everything in your organization, which we haven't put an ROI figure on here. So what I want to do now is talk to you about your retention policies and confidently applying those. One of the biggest things we see in organizations is the legacy file share. You've all got one. Again, I'm happy for someone to jump into the questions and go, my organization doesn't, but there is a file share somewhere in your organization and it's probably attached to some data that was once upon a time very important. But there's a very, very good chance that unless you know exactly everything that's in that file share and have been keeping really good record keeping on those for all of these years, that it's going to be difficult for someone who was not actively involved in that data that was perhaps created 10 or 20 years ago to make a good decision of it's time for it to go. And again, most of people, people being people, certainly even myself, if it was my responsibility to ensure that we deleted a very large volume of data from a file share, I'd want the information first that told me what it was, what its value was, what was in it. And then that would help me to make a much better decision around, I'm now comfortable to remove that from my environment. And so if we think about even just event-based disposition is going to cause all of those problems along the lines of HR terminations, project dates. It's very, very rare that even today, that if you, let's imagine you're using a SharePoint site and you had all of your project information in it, that when the project is finished, that someone comes back and puts that project close date on every single object inside that environment, or across teams, or in the emails, or over in the file shares, or even in the structured data system like Workday or the project management system that they were using. It's highly unlikely that that happens at the end of a project, meaning this data floats around for years and years. And while we might know it's about a particular project, we don't know when we should be getting rid of it because it's been cataloged poorly. And of course, that then leads to that fragmentation that I'm talking about there, then leads to the loss of that context. And if I'm the person responsible, I'm the owner of that division, and it's like, hey, the IT team comes to me and says, we'd like to remove these terabytes of data. Not having that information and understanding what's in there means that I'm probably going to push back and say, I'm not sure we can get rid of it because I don't know what's in there. Now, there's also the simple problem of ownership. If you think about some of the larger government organisations, and I can see that there's a handful of them on the call here, they might be made up of many other smaller organisations, either through machinery government changes or just the way in which the portfolios have rolled out. And so even just having that division break out and move to another organisation becomes really difficult, because how do you know who owns what data inside your organisation? So again, using our intelligence pipeline, you can actually feed to what we call our metadata enrichment platform the details of who owns what particular systems or who owns what particular data, sites, etc. So that as it's being catalogued, that information around the data owner or even when the information should be moved on, or other critical information like an event date happens, that can be stamped on every single object that falls under those banners. And so that metadata enrichment, I like to call it, decorating the metadata with all of this extra information, can actually improve that event-based disposition, and can also help in like metadata poor sources like file shares, which are just folders upon folders with Kris's stuff and my stuff, and then Project X, and then a bunch of other information. So in those instances, you might be able to stamp on it things like which division I was a part of, or maybe just me as the owner, because not all objects are going to have some sort of author field in those places. And so you can use that metadata enrichment to enhance your capability or your chances of getting a good disposition outcome. So let's use a HR example for this one, as around unlocking the ROI. So let's imagine that all of the series of employee documents are stored in a secured SharePoint space, only accessed by the appropriate team members. But there's a third-party HR system that manages the actual employee termination, and that date is recorded there. Upon termination, there's usually a process where the HR manager would now have to go back and add the termination date to every single document that's back in that SharePoint space. And while there might not be millions of documents there could be hundreds, and that could easily take, let's say, for example, an hour. And in an organization with, say, an average turnover rate of, say, 15%, in our standard 1,000-person organization, that might be somewhere in the vicinity of 150 terminations or 150 hours of time that are allocated to just painting metadata onto a system that could have easily have been done automatically. And of course, we can all work out that the HR manager's time multiplied by 150 adds up to a significant saving of their time, but also an investment from the business. And more importantly, that's just one example that this could be used for, to ensure that you get that great event-based disposition outcome. You could use it for all of your projects. If you had 10 projects in an organization with thousands of documents at any given time. I had a look just yesterday at the Queensland State digital dashboard, and not all the projects are listed there, but all the significant projects are. And there's one organisation in Queensland at the moment that has over 100 projects listed on that digital dashboard. So my expectation is that most organisations have got probably hundreds and hundreds of projects running at any given time that would get the benefit of having this type of event-based disposition assigned, because it's likely that either the project manager or other team members are contractors. They move on after the project is done to other projects or out of the business to other organisations. No one has any idea of when those projects finished or when they should be deleted. And you can actually build this into your regular workflow using that metadata enrichment platform, all built into the RecordPoint Data Trust platform. So let's talk about one more, which is that pre-migration. So I already spoke about the legacy file shares that we've all got in our environment. One of the biggest things in this is, again, back to that reluctance. It's been sitting there for 10 years. We've moved from file share technology to a different file share technology to a different file share technology over the last 20 years. And this data's sort of been lifted and shifted as we've moved along. I've seen it plenty of times in organizations, even more recently, of picking up file shares and dumping them into either Microsoft or SharePoint environments, where it's just it's a dumping ground, a genuine lift and shift of that data. And realistically, while that appears to be the quickest and easiest way to do things, there's actually tools out there now, and the RecordPoint Data Trust platform can help with this, where it's actually able to help you decide what's good information and where the value of that information is, and what you should be migrating versus what you can actually get out of that is a reduction of that data. Not only does that make the migration shorter and less time consuming and therefore cost less, it also means that the data that does come across is higher value, more useful, and doesn't create noise in the organization as well. So using the RecordPoint Data Trust platform file analysis tooling, we can actually deploy this either on-premise or even at the edge of your network, depending on the type of environment you've got. It can actually go through almost any unstructured file share environment, and it will report back out to you the duplicates in that environment, anything that's redundant, obsolete, or trivial. So anything that's really old, 0-byte files, executables, other things that you're not going to want to migrate. And it will also identify for you all of that PII and PCI information, so you know, hey, we shouldn't just pick this up and lob it into another system. There's really highly critical or highly sensitive information. Maybe we need to make a different decision. Or perhaps, given its age, we should just be destroying this on the basis that it's no longer required. And of course, that also gives you a really simple configurable reporting tool and configurable dashboard, so you can actually see what's happening in under that file analysis environment. The other side of this is that can then be connected directly to the other end of the information intelligence pipeline and can be fed in such that only the objects now of high value get marked as records and are then managed, so that you can actually start to apply appropriate disposition to those file shares and not migrate at all, and simply just slowly destroy all the objects down to a point where you can switch that file share off. So you now have an alternate position you can take when it comes to file migration. So let's have a quick look at that ROI around those objects. So again, that 1,000-person company is highly likely to have somewhere in the vicinity of, say, 50 terabytes of data in legacy file shares. We've got a little bit of information pulled from the Veritas Databerg report of 2020. The average cost per year of a terabyte of data is roughly $2,000 just to store it. And that sort of rolls in rough IT costs of humans, backup, storage, power, those sorts of things. So that's costing you just sitting there $100,000 a year. Now, we know from the report that on average, most organizations are seeing roughly 28% of those legacy file shares are ready to go. Let's just get rid of it. And we're seeing roughly 20% can be disposed of according to simple retention policies. This stuff's just aged out, even past all of your existing retention policies. Using just those simple numbers, you could reduce the storage down to 26 terabytes. You've almost halved the effort of the migration. And while you're continuing to do that, you're actually able to get savings on that storage of nearly $48,000 a year as well. So again, built into this platform are a number of tools that have simple ways. So if we look at all of the savings that we will have made of that standard 1,000-person organization, it becomes far in excess across the organization of the total cost of this platform. And so you can start to see that ROI. And of course, I'm obviously using a very simple set of examples today, but if you wanted to have a conversation, please feel free to reach out to the RecordPoint team. They're absolutely happy to talk to you about how this works for you. And if you are looking to add if you're a RecordPoint customer looking to add some of these features, again, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you build those business cases of where you're going to get the savings and that return on investment. So let's jump in very quickly and finish up. I'm approaching time. So why are we different? Look, from a records management perspective, we don't charge by user. We actually work under the model of helping you to manage your data. So we're literally looking at, you can have unlimited users. It doesn't matter where they are, what they're doing. Most people won't even know that they're doing it. They're working in their standard platform. We connect an enterprise connected to it, and we're effectively doing it by stealth, by still giving the organization all the value they need to actually do all of their compliance, make these cost savings, and help them with their security and privacy as well. We're providing all of that vital intelligence at every stage, pre-migration, regular during capture, and obviously being able to manage for the long term through automatic classification and helping them to manage their retention and disposal. We're able to help all of that be standard and defensible. So you've got a process where you can say, hand on heart, I had it, I managed it appropriately, and I destroyed it according to these rules. We had a process whereby it didn't matter where the object was inside the organization, it became under management. It followed a standard process for categorization and for signaling, and then it met its appropriate disposal over time. And of course, as we've spoken about today, there's significant ROI potential in being able to ensure that not only are you managing your information, but you're managing all of your information across all of your sources consistently and repeatably across the entirety of your information estate. Look, thank you very much, everybody, with that. I am going to quickly jump in because I can see that it looks like there's a couple of questions. For those of you who need to drop off, again, thank you so much. RecordPoint.com is obviously our website. You're welcome to jump onto that. And for those who are dropping, again, thank you very much. My name's Kris Brown. And so someone's asked, your licensing model works on the number of records. And in actual fact, we've got two pricing plans. So feedback from our customers has been that it's difficult to budget for those number of records. So now we've actually got unlimited record numbers, and we actually help you work on the way in which you're processing on any given day. So you no longer have to budget for how many records am I dealing with. So again, depending on your type of organization, the number of records might have made sense. But now, taking feedback from some of those customers, it's difficult to budget for those. We've got other programs in place for that. So please, absolutely, if you're not sure, reach out to the team. They can step you through the different ways can do that. So we've got a question here. Can the file analysis module assist with determining file share ownership? Yes, absolutely. You can actually help through the reporting and get all of the information you're able to have across that thing. So by getting that inventory, you can start to see what are the file names, who are the file owners, what information is being mentioned, what sort of type of information is in there, even the file types themselves. So given all of that matrix of information, you can start to make good decisions about, well, this actually belongs to these groups. Even more importantly, when you push it through the intelligence pipeline, you can now start to set some rules. So you stamp that ownership on the records as they go through as well. So even though in the file share itself, it's just data, when you're looking at it from the records world, you can actually start to filter it by that additional metadata information as well. Excuse me. Let's have a look. What else have we got here? How does it determine a true duplicate and that it actually forms part, or the duplicate that forms part of a new record? Look, at the end of the day, there's always going to be exceptions, but let me tell you what we do, and that should help with the answer. Firstly, what we do not do is just look at the file hash. So, and the reason why that's something we don't do is because if you just looked at the file hash of a SharePoint file that's in 2 different SharePoint sites, it will give you a different file hash. So it can be exactly the same file, but because the metadata of SharePoint is added to the object at the time, they're in different file shares. They're therefore not duplicates according to the file hash. So in our intelligence pipeline, we actually extract all of the text of the object and then hash that. So regardless of the source or any other manipulation of the source on the object, we can actually match that the 2 records are exactly the same. And that helps us then to do the next part, which is, now that I know these 2 objects are the same, and I know what they've been categorized as, and I know where they live, and I know who created them, and I know what retention that's been applied to them, I can actually report on all of that and actually see for every hash, which is the identifier for that particular duplicate, where the information lives. And so it might be that depending on that source or the user or other things, that these will genuinely be new records with different disposition, but everything else would be a duplicate that you could remove. So it does not remove the need to do the analysis, but it does give you all of the information that you wouldn't have had previously, not only across a source, but all of your sources. So a file that's on a file share, in Exchange, on SharePoint, in OneDrive, in Teams, can actually be all pulled together as one. I'm going to quickly scroll through because there's quite a lot. We will answer all the questions, folks, in terms of if you have responded, we'll make sure we respond to you. So please don't take me not answering a question as me not answering. Can the platform scan for clear text passwords? That's a really interesting one. So yes, with a caveat. Every word could be a clear text password, so that would be difficult. But what it can do is actually score a signal on the basis of, I see PWD and then something, or password and then something, or username and then something. So you're actually able to create these signals on the file analysis platform such that you can actually start to capture where someone's gone, oh, user, pass, and then you see those things punched out there. But otherwise, there'd be, I think that'd be a very, very difficult challenge to do it if it was just every single word in a document ultimately could be a clear text password. But there are definitely methods that could help deal with those things as well. Okay, folks, look, I am going to wrap up because we are at 45 minutes. There are a number of other questions here. So again, we will make sure that we respond and answer to them. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending again. I think there was a couple there around, can we get the slides and things? There'll be a follow-up email that comes from the RecordPoint team, so we'll make sure that we help you out with those as well. And again, thank you, everybody.